Welcome back to Songwriting Idiots, the podcast where every month two idiots try and write a song in a genre and on a topic decided by you. My name is Ralph, and for the first time in quite a while, I have Dan right here in front of me in Vienna. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm doing all the better for seeing you in the flesh.
It is quite a sight to behold, isn't it?
It's a little strange, to be honest.
It's been a while.
Yeah. The Corona times have allowed us finally to be back together as one for our first ever podcast face-to-face together. I'm so looking forward to it.
It's been quite a challenge. So now we are here in July 2020, just after the Corona meltdown. And it just took us half an hour to set this up. It is.
It's a lot easier to do it over borders internationally than it is to do it in the same room.
That's where we are now. You can actually do it easier over the internet than in person. But it's still, nonetheless, nice to be here. Dan, do you remember what we did last time?
I have a vague memory of me singing some things in Spanish. Is that right?
Would you call it Spanish?
I will call it a form of Google translated Spanish, yes.
Indeed. Yeah, last month, if you did not yet take a listen, we tackled reggaeton. And here's a little callback to that. Déjame vivir mi vida, yo te pido perdón. Yo soy el patrón. Yo soy el patrón.
So that was a little look back at our reggaeton adventure, and we have now moved on from reggaeton to a genre that is in English, thankfully, from my perspective anyway. And you, the listeners, voted last month that Ralph and I, the Songwriting Idiots, should tackle the wonderful, the mythical genre of Motown. And not only that, we tackle the genre of Motown with the lyrical theme of making a risotto. How was it for you, Ralph?
This was a tough one. I think we can probably agree on that. And it's a tough one for many reasons, right? I mean, Motown is not really a genre. It's a way of life, almost, right? It's a label, but it's a hit factory. It's not just a label. And it's also a very important cultural, institution, right, in the US, especially for the black population, of course, but for US music in general. So, of course, during this time, especially, was ever more important, but also challenging to talk about an issue like that and try to do our best to recreate some of the great sounds they did back in the 60s and 70s.
Right, and I really hope we do it justice, because Motown was such a fantastic genre in so many ways. As you mentioned, it influenced people musically and socially and politically. And of course, we're in July 2020. Over the last month, there have been some, big protests happening all across the world for the Black Lives Matter movement. So this genre actually fits in quite neatly with a very current topic now that was also a topic back in the 60s, 70s, and yeah, this is where we are today.
Anytime before and after that.
Correct.
Tragically, yeah. It's hard, yes, this is an audio show, but we're two white dudes talking about this and trying to tackle this genre. It's not an easy feat to do, and, well, of course, ought to be a bit more careful here than with reggaeton, but...
Mm-hmm. But this is all about the music, right? And the founder of Motown himself has always said that this style of music, this genre of music, is not about race. It's about the music and what it means to people. Black, white, it doesn't matter. It is really just about coming together, actually, and using the power of music to create something special.
And I would argue that's still very much the case today. Maybe to guide us into the genre before we come to the songs, what are some of the major artists that come to mind to you when you think of Motown? Maybe even before you get into research now? And especially now that you listen to it for a month, what would you say are the big names here?
So when I first, when we first discovered that we were doing Motown, the first kind of bands that came to my head they were always in black and white in my mind, number one. They were never in color. It was always black and white. And, from the TV. And they were bands like The Temptations. Mm-hmm. and the Supremes. They were the bands that I thought were Motown. And I didn't realize that there were so many other, honestly, world-class artists that were signed to Motown. So for me, it was really those groups from back then, brilliant harmonies, and a fantastic image. And through diving into the genre a bit deeper, there were artists which I'm sure we all know that honestly I did not realize were signed to Motown. An example would be Stevie Wonder. I didn't actually know he was signed to Motown, but he was signed at an incredibly young age, at 11 years old.
And he's the only one of them, of the original artists, still there, right? I mean, Motown is now owned by Universal, I believe.
I think it's owned by a million holding companies.
Not quite the same thing, let's be clear, but yeah, he's still there. For me, it was actually the first thing that popped into my head was when the two of us were stuck in a muddy field in England at Glastonbury Festival, and we saw Lionel Richie. And maybe because of that, he was the first person that came to mind for me. And only now I realized that really my perception of Motown being this big 70s pop thing that the Commodores that I connected with Lionel Richie, is actually just a very small fragment of the whole picture. It started a lot earlier, and there were a lot of huge and influential artists way before Lionel Richie even entered the stage. So I learned quite a bit here.
And one artist that I learned of that I really had no idea about before, and turns out, is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I really should have known about, is someone called Smokey Robinson.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure we'll discuss in the history, he was such a key person within that movement. He had his own band, The Miracles, but as a songwriter himself, wrote some absolutely incredible songs. Such a talented writer, composer, and formed a formidable partnership with the founder of Motown.
He was a business partner in the end, right? He was basically part of the business, yeah. Shall we move into the history quickly?
It sounds like we're heading that way, straight into the history.
Because I think in this part, usually it's a bit of a fun thing to talk about history, when we talk about pop punk 2 months ago, reggaeton last month. Now I find it a lot more important to do that. And right from the bat, I really want to shout out a great episode I listened to on a podcast called 1619 by the New York Times. It's, I guess, for lack of a better term, a Black history podcast. And in one episode, which I hope we're not going to forget to link, it's episode number 3 in the show notes, they talk about the birth of American music. Not Black American music, but American music. And they were talking about this huge arch, basically, starting from the 1800s all the way to today. And Motown really stands right in the middle of this, because Motown was the first time ever, after centuries or at least decades of black music that originated from the descendants of slaves in the US, blues, jazz, any other popular music ever in the US. This was for the first time that a major label, and a successful label, was actually run by members of the black community, with artists out of that community, and was self-reliant in that sense. And that is an incredibly big deal, right? We're talking 1959 here, that Motown was founded. And you could talk forever about the history before that. I mentioned some of the things, that it was normal that Black American culture and music was appropriated by whites, and then at least produced and sold by white people, but often, example Elvis, sung by white people. So this is really a huge deal. But for more on that, I would really recommend anyone to listen to that episode. It's a half-an-hour show, a wild ride through 200 years of American pop culture, and it really opened my eyes to many things, and I cannot recommend it enough.
And following on from your kind of podcast recommendation there, I have a documentary recommendation. We watched this together. It's called Hitsville, and it was made in 2019. And it really tells the story of Motown, I think, in a better way than either of us ever could. And it really is a story. It starts from the founder, Barry Gordy, going from his job in a factory, in the Ford factory.
And a boxer.
And he was a boxer first, and then worked in a factory, taking what he learned in the Ford factory in Detroit and transposing that into essentially a hit factory that Motown was. And one of the most fascinating things that I found about Motown was it all happened in one studio, and that's where the sound comes from. It it was really a hit-making factory in the sense they had quality control, where a group of people would all vote on what songs they thought would be hits, and they were the songs that were released. And that caused us a bit of a headache, because what we discovered was that Motown songs were generally number ones. So an added challenge for this month was to try and write a song, not only in a genre, that would reach number one in the charts, which is not easy.
Spoiler alert, I don't think mine will hit number one anytime soon.
I'm sure neither of our songs would hit number one ever. But I found this quality control idea fascinating, and how they all sat together and really voted on what songs should come out and for which artists. I think it would be wrong not to mention the Funk Brothers as well, very briefly. They were the band that played on most of the Motown hits. And a little fun fact for you, the Funk Brothers played on more number one records than the Beatles, Elvis, the Rolling Stones, and the Beach Boys combined. So those guys combined had 39 number ones, and Motown themselves had more than 50 number one singles in the pop chart and more than 100 US R&B number ones.
God,
that's incredible.
That is ridiculous.
And the Funk Brothers, there were 13 of them in total. They kind of rotated. They weren't always the same.
Sure.
They played on the vast majority of these, and most people haven't heard of them before.
Basically a group of Detroit jazz musicians, right?
Correct.
Taken straight out of the club.
And onto the top of the charts.
Ridiculous.
Fantastic. So that's essentially Motown in a nutshell, I would say. Famous for its hit-making factory and its unique sound.
Absolutely. So also I think a link to that documentary is going to be in the show notes. Amazon Prime, if I'm not mistaken. So you need that or you have to buy it. But if you do give it a watch. We watched it yesterday until 1:30 at night, and it was fascinating. So yeah, I cannot recommend it enough. Shall we then move on to the first song?
Let's do this.
I opened. That means your song is first. Usually we crack a beer here, but today we are both lucky and unlucky. Your lovely girlfriend brought us beer. Thanks, Nikki. But somehow she managed to open them beforehand.
It was already cracked.
That traditional cracking of the beer. But we can actually cheers.
We can cheers. Let's cheers near the microphone so we get a very, very nice bottle clink. Here we go. Oh, very nice. Ooh. Arguably better than the
Could get used to it.
Yeah.
Here we go. Song number 1.
For all of you listeners that are wondering which beer made that wonderful sound, this is a beer from Austria. It's called Stiegl. It's from Salzburg, and it's the Pils version. So not the normal Helles that they make, but a Pils.
I liked it last night. I'm sure I'm going to like it now.
So sit back, Ralph, and listeners, and enjoy my song. It's called Get My Baby Back, and I hope you enjoy my attempt at writing a number 1 Motown hit. Here we go.
Let's jump right in.
Darling, now for so long. They say the good food is the key to the heart. Mine's been hurting ever since we've been apart. These tears I cry are just from the onion that I cut. I just gotta hope my cooking is enough. This ain't no starter, no, this is not a snack. We're gonna be fine. We will be fine. The rice is frying now, honey. I'm pouring the wine. They say the British people ain't got no taste. Well, it's getting hot in here and there's no time to waste. These tears I cry just from the onion that I cut. And I just gotta hope my cooking is enough. This ain't no starter, no, this is not a snack. With my risotto, I gotta get my baby back. And I've done all that I can. Get her back. There's no mushroom, just extra parmesan. These tears I cry just from the onion that I cut bleeding. I just gotta hope my cooking is enough. This ain't no starter, no, this is not a snack. It's the main with my risotto, I gotta get my baby back.
Can I tell you a secret, Dan?
I'm not sure, can you? Is it okay?
I hate all the odd numbers of Songwriting Idiots.
Number 1 and 3?
1 and 3.
Why is that?
Because you go first, and then I sink to the ground, and I realize that there's no way I can compete with this stuff. What the hell have you been doing here?
I feel like I have put blood, sweat, and tears into that song, actually.
Beautiful. I don't really, there's so many things I could say. I mean, it starts weird. At the beginning, I thought, that could be a reggae song. And in hindsight, it's actually nice. It kind of takes us from reggaeton into Motown. Because it's weird, right? Because in Motown, usually, you have on the strong beats, on the 2 and the 4, you do have quite some emphasis. In your intro, it sounds almost offbeaty, almost a bit reggae. But otherwise, great job on the harmonies. Absolutely love that. So many layers. It's absolutely beautiful. I have no idea how he did the trumpets.
That was a lot of just playing around, actually.
Oh, yeah. I was also thinking of using trumpets in my song, and I decided against it because it just seemed like a ton of work. So, yeah, amazing. And something that is unusual, before we maybe get to your thoughts, it's interesting that you have a bridge like that, because I loved it, and especially how you carried over this trumpet or trombone, I think trombone sound from the chorus into the bridge, and build it up nicely, and break it down and build it up again. Beautiful, but unusual in Motown. So yeah, quite brave. But what I would find really interesting now is, how did you write the song? How did you even start? What did you do first? What was your starting point?
So I guess this would be the same for both of us. My actual first starting point was really getting to know as much Motown as possible, and really analysing the things that they do. And I learned 2 things. The first is that some of the Motown artists use very simple chords and very simple progressions. And they had a motto, keep it simple, stupid. Yes.
Kiss.
But then there were also other artists who use the most ridiculous chords and chord progressions that I couldn't come up with in my wildest dreams. So I went for the first option, obviously, and tried to keep it simple.
Needless to say.
Tried to keep it very simple. So I started this song I actually started on the piano, which is fairly unusual for me because I'm mostly a guitar player and trying to, get by on the piano. But I realized that because this is not a very guitar-heavy genre, generally speaking, I'd have to, spend a bit more time around the piano, most likely. And I I wanted to start with the melody this time, and I tried, and I came up with a basic kind of melody and fit the chords around that to a certain extent. But then I didn't like it very much.
So you started with something that was still in the final song, or is something you
it's not there anymore.
Together? Okay.
But what actually came out of it were the chords, the chord progression, which is a chord progression that I've never used before. It's in the key of F, and it kind of goes F, G minor, and then B flat major. And there's a D minor and a C in there somewhere as well.
So 1, 2, 4.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
But in a key that I've not really done much in before, because I'm scared of the B flat.
And also, anyone out there who plays guitar will probably agree that writing a song in F major is just not a good idea. It's going to kill your wrist.
Yeah, exactly right.
You don't do that.
All bar chords, basically. Yeah,
you have the B, you have the F. It's awkward on guitar.
Correct, and I think that's why people don't tend to write in that key. I wrote it in that because it just seemed to fit nicely, and I think it worked really well actually in the end. It's a simple chord progression, but that sounds a little unique because it's in that particular key, which I thought was cool. So one of the first things that came with that song was, after the chord progression, was the trumpet, actually.
Oh, right, okay. So you laid down the chord progression only on piano, basically?
Yes.
All right. And you had an idea for the lyrics already then, or you went with trumpet before lyrics?
Trumpet before lyrics.
Interesting.
And the piano at the start was honestly a bit too much. I wanted to put quite a lot of energy into it, and it ended up just overpowering the song totally. So I basically stripped the piano right back to simple, just chords, bum, bum, very simple, and let actually the bass and the guitar do a little bit of the upbeat rhythm work. And what I essentially did was, after the trumpet came, I thought, this is either going to be great or awful. And I'm very pleased that it turned out, I think, pretty well. And I just started riffing. I started just riffing various things over, just to get a bit of a melody. And then for a week solid, I sat down every day for about 10 minutes. And I thought, okay, I need to write a song about risotto. What am I going to do? So I wrote about 5 or 6 songs, just lyrically, with no idea about melody or anything. And I took one was literally a recipe that I wrote out in kind of song format. The other one was essentially what came out in the end. Another one was more kind of abstract about risotto. And what came out is a Frankenstein of all of those songs that I wrote. And they weren't really songs, they were just lyrics for songs. Because I thought, that line sounds pretty cool, or that idea sounds pretty cool. And that's, for example, where the line, "These tears I cry are just from the onion that I cut," comes from. I wrote that in one of the songs. I was like, that sounds pretty good, because you start working out which lines stick with you. And I started putting stars next to them. And then I essentially put them all together, had to add and take away a few things, and that's how the lyrics came up. Yeah, and then the singing melody, that took a lot of work, actually, because when I first sung it, it was fairly, quite boring. And one of the hard things I think in songwriting is with the melody, trying to make it interesting.
That is so challenging for me as well, trying to come up with interesting melodies just by singing them. I think we're both not singers, not traditionally. I mean, you do a lot of singing lessons and practice now. Me a little bit, but I feel like for a trained singer or someone who's been singing for a long time, like Nikki, for example, right, your girlfriend, they can pull it off. But for us, it just comes way more naturally to write something, be it on a piano or on a guitar, and create something interesting and unique there than it is with singing, because you end up going back to very standard and quite boring melodies initially, right?
Exactly right. And then, so I ended up with a very boring melody, and then I worked from that. It's better to have something than nothing. So I took that and I said, okay, well, this sounds a little bit boring. How can I make it more exciting? And that's where I put in quite a few jumps, right? And I think that works quite a lot. And I also sing the verse in a slightly different voice, a little bit lower than in the chorus, which is much more kind of bright. And I did that on purpose to try and create a nice dynamic between the verse and the chorus.
Have a lift, yeah.
Yeah.
It should be mentioned maybe for all of you now wondering, you've heard the song just now, do you want to move back in the podcast to listen to it again after hearing all that, no, you can find the song on our website. We're going to tell you about this in the end, so you can take a listen after this, because I now just want to go back to the song. Now you're saying all these things because I want to hear them again now that I can be aware. I'm sure many listeners will hopefully too, but you can find all that as MP3s on the web.
Very sort of on a production side of things. One thing that I realized about Motown was that they use kind of the left and right speakers very much to create an interesting dynamic effect. So you probably realize if you listen to the podcast on headphones that in my song, the drums were all the way on one side pretty much. And that's very unusual. And that's something that I noticed from a lot of Motown songs, that they had these very strange, it's called panning, right? Where you pan something left or right, and it creates very interesting effects. I put all the trumpets on one side, all the strings on the other side, vocals a little bit on one side, and it creates a very interesting space. And I think you could spend a lot of time talking about this because the Motown were really masters of this. But I tried to do a similar kind of thing to try and create a bit more of that Motown sound, which it is impossible to recreate anyway.
But it is interesting because as someone who grew up like we did with modern-ish rock and pop music, you're very used to the idea that the drum and the bass are in the center back, the vocals are center front, and yes, there is panning, but it's only the additional stuff usually, right? You may pan a synth, you may pan a piano, maybe a guitar sometimes, depending on the genre, but it's very unusual these days to pan a drum kit to the right.
Unheard of nowadays, unheard of.
You wouldn't.
It wouldn't work on the radio.
Yeah, you just wouldn't do that.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Maybe a quick word on the harmonies as well, very briefly.
Absolutely.
They were tricky.
Well,
harmony,
tell me about it.
Yeah, harmony is generally very tricky and took me probably the longest out of all of their individual elements to do. And but adds, I think, a lot to the song, and is typical Motown as well, right? A bit of harmony in the background, emphasizing some of the words, and I'm very pleased that it essentially turned out as it did. It was really a lot of work and a lot of experimenting, but overall I'm pretty happy with how everything turns out, and what a great learning experience it was as well.
No, I think you can be proud, absolutely. I'm going to take another listen right after this, or we will together, but let me tell you, this in absolute terms already was a great song, but in relative terms to mine, it might shine even brighter.
So Ralph, I'm very curious. Tell me the name of your song before we get right into it. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's
already not too dissimilar to yours. I think the theme might be in the same ballpark. My song's name is Melting Away. And shall we just take a listen?
I'm ready for it. Here we go.
Another Tuesday night at Alfredo's down the corner. I felt alone in my plight, but never much of a mourner. Sat at my usual table. To this day I'm unable to say why I looked over. I just was hooked, had to go there. In hot water, when I saw you, getting hotter, when I called just you, like fire, in risotto, melting away thinking of you. Before I knew what I did, my feet had carried me over. I didn't care to admit how frail I was, and moreover, asked to go for a date in an Italian cafe. Still I can't quite express how it felt when you uttered that in hot water, when I saw you, getting hotter, when I called just you, like butter, in risotto, melting away when I'm with you. time I turn over, every morning in bed, my heart it starts beating slower, as it did since we met. In hot water, when I saw you, getting hotter, when I called just you, like butter, in risotto. In hot water, when I saw you, getting hotter, when I called just you, like butter, in risotto. In hot water, when I called you, getting hotter, when I saw you, just like butter, in risotto.
So I feel a little bit like I'm melting like butter, sitting here looking at you and listening to that song.
And only part of the reason is the weather in Vienna.
That it's really warm.
It's very warm. We had to close the windows in this tiny room.
It's getting hot in here. So, a few things that I can pick out from that I really enjoyed. The first thing, and I think all listeners will agree with this, the standout thing about your song there were the harmonies and the call and response harmonies in the chorus, right? Fantastic. Really, really enjoyed them. And they're the thing that I think will stick with me long after this episode is over. I also very much enjoyed the guitar that kind of comes in, I think kind of in the pre-chorusy kind of area, or as part of the chorus, not really quite sure, but it adds a lot of energy and I think that's really good. And also, I can tell right away, you did not take Dan's easy way out. Option number 1, simple chords.
I did not.
Those did not sound like simple chords to me. Those sounded like crazy, strange, mystical 7th chords, for example. Not the normal chords that I was using. And I think they work extremely well. They create a really nice kind of jazzy-ish feel that I think adds a lot of color to the song, a lot of soul, if you like. And I know that a lot of artists did that, and I presume that's where you got it from. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you came up with those chords, for example, and your general songwriting process as you went through making this song.
Yeah, sure. So I think you know me well enough. I would not ever write a song including even 1 7th chord unless it's a standard blues, because I don't really, I don't feel too confident with those. The fact that it happened now is, or the reason why it happened now is really because I wrote the song the other way around. Usually, like you and most people I know, I start with a chord progression. And especially in modern music, when you do that, when you have a chord progression, that usually means you have a 3 or 4, maybe 5 chord loop, right? So you usually just loop the same stuff. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I'm used to. That's what we did with both pop punk and reggaeton. This time, I just grabbed my guitar. First, I tried to come up with melodies just singing them without any chords, just trying some things out. And I quickly realized that I cannot do it. So I grabbed my guitar and just noodled around in the A major scale. So I was like, all right, okay. I mean, I'm going to play in some sort of major key. So why not try and, just play the A major scale and see what I can come up with. Very similar to you, I tried to do interval jumps. That's how I came up with the harmony part, which is on the high A. It's the and then the 3 and the 5. So the in hot water and then when I saw you. So these kind of things. That's how I came up with that. And basically everything you hear in the song was born as a guitar line. So there's no melody in that. It isn't. And that's when it became interesting, because then I realized I need chords for this. And I went to YouTube, how to harmonize a melody. So I finally learned that. And you say it's complex, but any jazz guitarist would probably disagree with you right there. I use 7 chords, and it's all the 7 chords of the A major scale. So that it's nothing too crazy, but for my standards, it is a bit weird. And what I did is I wrote down all the 7 chords that were in the scale. And then I looked at what notes were in the chords. So 4 notes, right? The 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7. And I looked at my melody, wrote it down, and tried to find chords that match with the melody, at least to a certain degree, to make it sound, functional. And yeah, that's how I came up with it. It's interesting. I quite like it. It's something I would never usually write that way. But I wouldn't say it's crazy chords, not really. But it's weird to play one chord is crazy. I do have a G sharp half diminished at 11 chord in there, I think. But yeah, that's a weird one.
And it's interesting that you mentioned kind of looking on YouTube, because I'm not ashamed to say that before every episode there's frantic YouTubing going on, trying to work out how to play certain chords, what makes a genre. Like it's always interesting to try and learn something new through doing this. And for you, I can tell it was really going through this chord progression and then actually the melody first and then harmonizing it from there. In terms of song structure, how did you deal with that?
With that, I think I did the same thing I do every time with these songs. I try to listen to as much as I can. So usually, maybe you can also tell the listeners about that later on. Usually we have 1 month to figure all this stuff out, right? So I take at least a week of just listening to songs and then kind of compiling a playlist of maybe 10 to 20 songs that I like particularly, and then keep listening to them over and over again. And usually I then try to figure out what elements they have. And I realized that, and I mentioned it before with your song, that bridges they exist, certainly do, but they're not very common. Some other elements that are quite, well, you see quite often in Motown would be an intro drum thing, which I did. Sometimes you go straight into a chorus, which I considered doing, didn't do. And I realized that it's also quite common to use several verses, more than in our standard 2020 song structure. Because today, when you listen to any song on the radio, you can be fairly certain it's going to be verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, over. And I thought, oh, you know what? I'm not going to have a bridge, but the song is quite short as is, so I'm just going to add a half verse before the fade-out choruses. And
I think that was a very elegant solution to that kind of problem, because I just like a bridge in, right? And I think the half verse worked actually really well. And I think it really makes this structure move away from the standard structures that many of us think of, which, as you mentioned, Motown was really famous for. And one thing I forgot to mention actually was the bass. I think the bass is really good, especially in the intro. I think it really, you think, okay, this has got a groove. Here we go. And I read that Berry Gordy was a big fan of having the song grab your attention in the first few bars, because, he had hundreds, thousands of songs to listen to, along with his quality control team. And he's always said, if you didn't get me within the first 15 seconds or so, then I would just stop listening. You have the best chorus in the world and he would never know about it. So I think the way that you did the bass was very cool. Did you have any particular inspiration for the bass line?
At the time of writing it, I didn't think so. Later on, I realized it's almost a copy of I Just Called to Say I Love You. Have a listen to it. So mine is dum 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 dum, and I think I Just Called to Say I Love You is dum 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 dum. So it's a 1/5 thing going on. It's fair enough. I didn't have time to change it after that, and it's what it is. I acknowledge I stole from Stevie Wonder.
Well, you probably stole from the Funk Brothers, actually.
Oh, who knows? Who knows?
And there's no shame in that, because let's face it, me and you, with the Songwriting Idiots, we are not the Funk Brothers.
Are we not? Yeah, I guess we can agree to that. So, basically, that means we can move to the wrap-up of this genre. Some final thoughts before we
discover what joys await us for the next month. I have to say that this month has been extremely pleasurable. It's been, so honestly, with reggaeton, I didn't know much about it, and it didn't really grab me as much as Motown did. Motown, I'm so happy we had Motown, because I've learned a lot from a songwriting perspective. As you mentioned, there was no formula for the songwriting itself. Sometimes I started with a chorus, sometimes I started with just vocals, sometimes it was purely bass, sometimes it was some weird drums. Fantastic stuff. Spanned, decades, and developed with the times, became a bit more funky in the 70s. And I've learned a lot from the production side as well. How to arrange some horns, for example.
Crazy, yeah.
Which I never thought I would do.
Yeah, and even on a, maybe, I wouldn't even say entirely, but mainly theoretical level, it's quite interesting and eye-opening to see how they produce songs in the 60s. Because, of course, we're aware that they didn't have digital technology, sure. And I was aware that there were things like tape machines and, however many of them you had. But watching this documentary and just, reading up on all this stuff, it's crazy under what we would today call limitations they worked with. And I even incorporated some of that stuff in my song. They had this room called the Snake Pit. That was the main recording room in Hitsville.
Sounds friendly.
I think it was named that because of all the cables.
All the cables that were hanging all over the place in this chaotic room that such magic happened in.
Ridiculous. And, they had all the musicians in there, almost. I mean, the singers usually were in a separate room, but all the music that happened, maybe except for strings and horns, so drum, bass, guitar, stage piano, 2 drummers sometimes even, right, were in that one room. And I actually created a kind of a digital room with a little bit of echo, and I sent all my rhythm instruments into that room.
Clever.
To try and recreate what it might have sounded like, all being in the same room with the same mixed echo going on. So, and just thinking of these issues, or not even issues, these
limitations
standards they had back then, which were perfectly fine to create 50 number one hits. And today, very few people, if you've ever been to a recording studio, it's all super professional. It's completely isolated booths. You don't hear anything. It's incredible technology going on. And in the end, you don't need that, really. And that should really give anyone producing music at home, like we do, quite a bit of hope. You don't need a perfect environment. If you write a good song, which is hard enough, especially here with Motown, write a number one song. If you can do that, and you get into the recording side of things, like we are doing now, you have good chances of not being on the radio probably, but being noticed by someone if you really try it.
Correct. It's not about the technology, obviously. It's about the strength of your songwriting and the ideas that you have, and not being afraid to break out of the mold, because they broke the mold, right? There was no mold. They just smashed it. They did crazy things. So don't be afraid. And when you do that, don't forget there's always beauty in simplicity.
We really need to get these mugs.
These mugs, yeah.
Anything else to add?
No, I think that's it from Motown. I'll be sad to say goodbye, as I always am. I've really grown to love it, and I'm sure I'll continue to listen to all these amazing songs going forward in the future. But now it's time for the big reveal, the moment of truth, the moment I look forward to in every episode, where we discover what the two of us are going to be listening to as voted for by you, the listener. So, as always, we asked you, the listeners, to send in genre suggestions and lyrical suggestions, and also to vote on the 4 that Ralph and I selected for your listening pleasure this month. So, you've had a month to vote on which genre you would like Ralph and I to tackle head-on in the coming month. Ralph, can you remind the listeners what the genres were?
Yeah, it's worth mentioning all the genres, as Dan just said, but make it very clear, are chosen by you. We pick 4 of them from the list. And you can find out more about that at the end of this show if you want to take part. We had 4 genres and also 4 topics this month to vote on. The 4 genres were psytrance. Well, I still don't know what it is.
Whatever that is, yeah.
I had a quick look on YouTube. Every single video is 2 hours long, so I think it's something weird.
That would have been a long episode.
Well, I assume it's a lot of looping. So let's hope it's not that. We had something where we're not sure whether we would call it screamo or emo-core. We had a very wide, let's call it a genre, Disney songs, and we had Britpop. And for topics, we had also 4, of course, chosen by you. Number 1, the Roman Empire, which I'm very happy with if that comes up as a historian. I would love that. We had Things Donald Trump Said, which is good fun.
That is great.
The Floor is Lava.
Great game. I play regularly.
Great game.
At work.
Great hook for a song.
True.
Wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, that'd
Would
be
not
excellent,
mind
yeah.
that.
True.
And number 4, going back to the waxing salon after restrictions ease.
Which they have.
Which
and
they
that's why
have.
we're here.
We are now in between wave 1 and 2. Rejoice! All right.
Fantastic lyrical themes, and thank you to all listeners who have sent in suggestions for genres and suggestions for lyrical topics. They make us giggle all the time, and please keep sending them in, because we will keep putting them up.
All right, are you ready?
Oh, I'm nervous.
All right, I'm opening it now.
The big reveal.
We have a winner. 40% of the people out there voted for Disney songs.
Disney songs. Oh, wow. Disney.
Do you really hate us this much? Hey, you listening now. Yeah, I'm talking to you right there. Why?
Okay, so we have to write a song that will have to influence generations to come, because I'm sure we can all think of Disney songs that we listen to as kids, and we like to sing when we're absolutely hammered at 1 a.m. at a karaoke bar, right?
Yep.
We have to write a similar song.
I would like to sing one now, but due to copyright restrictions, I'm gonna refrain.
Okay, so we have to write a Disney song. Now that's going to be tricky, because Disney is broad. There are many different. We could just take our Motown songs and write different lyrics, and you could argue that that's a Disney song.
I think we're gonna probably sit together and maybe decide on some ground rules.
Yeah.
Between the two of us, you will find out next month what parameters we try to work within.
Maybe choosing a particular film to work with, because
maybe we have to make it a bit more narrow, but we'll see.
It's already an interesting question. What makes a Disney song a Disney song?
Yeah.
Interesting question.
Interesting. We will have a discussion about this. Yeah, you will find out next time, I'm sure. Do you want to know what topic?
I think it's very important that I find out what topic, and I hope it's one that will lead to hilarity.
That certainly. I don't see an easy way of doing a Disney song on that topic, but the winner with 45% of the vote is Things Donald Trump Said.
Things Donald Trump Said as a Disney song.
Oh, this is going to be a nightmare.
I already have some ideas coming into my head.
Oh.
I mean, he is a bit like a Disney character, isn't he, at the end of the day?
That is true. I mean, whatever the evil characters in Disney are,
right.
he's Scar.
Correct, yeah.
Hades. Just in a worse shape. I think Scar was quite fit. So he's like a fat Scar.
With worse hair.
With much worse hair. And also no scars to prove it.
That we're aware of.
I mean, because obviously he had bone spurs. He didn't go to Vietnam, as you surely know.
We're already getting political. This is going to be interesting.
So, if you are a conservative American listening, maybe don't listen to the next episode. You will not like it.
We should do a warning before the next episode.
And also, fuck you. Yeah,
so there we go. Donald Trump and Disney, we're coming for you.
Not much left to do, but if you want to find out how to jump in and help us out with topics and genres, stay tuned. All right, this is the end of the show for this month, but we will be back quite soon. We already talked about maybe even a bonus episode for later this year, so you will certainly hear from us. Until then, we always, and we mentioned it several times over the last hour, we always need you to submit new genres and topics to our list. So there is a Google form, I believe it is, some sort of Google document online where you can just write in genres and topics. And as mentioned, every month we pick 4 of them, as we did, or as we're gonna do this month again, for you to vote on. And all of that, both the submission and the vote and everything else, you can find on our website at songwritingidiots.com/vote. And of course, I should mention that the vote for not next month, but the month after that, obviously, is already up now. We don't yet know which for, because, when you listen to this, it's not actually now, time. But it's going to be up, so you can, right now when you listen to this, go on the website, songwritingidiots.com/vote, and actually cast your vote as well as submit new ideas.
Please follow us wherever you listen to us. iTunes, Google, Spotify would be fantastic. And please share this podcast with all your friends, family, colleagues, and people maybe that you dislike a little bit, so that they can enjoy the trials and tribulations of us, the Songwriting Idiots.
If you want to reach out to us, you can also do that directly Songwriting Idiots is on Instagram. We have an Instagram account. Follow us there for some behind-the-scenes insights. And if you just want to have a nice reminder that the vote is up and all these easy and nice things in life, you can get off our Instagram. And if you want to reach out to us directly, you can also reach us by email at podcast@songwritingidiots.com.
You can download the songs that you heard today from our website, songwritingidiots.com. And we also make a lovely little Spotify playlist for you with all of the songs that we've been listening to over the past month. So it's full of excellent number one hits, essentially, this time around. Well worth a listen, and you can find that on our website. It's a Spotify playlist.
Yeah, you can find the link there in the show notes or also directly on the website, songwritingidiots.com/Motown. Well, that's it, isn't it?
There we go. And I fear that our next podcast won't be face-to-face like it is this time.
Probably it won't be.
But I, nevertheless, look forward to destroying Donald Dump.
Oh.
But nevertheless, I look forward to destroying Donald Trump by Disney.
I can't wait. See you and everyone else then.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, now that Ralph's gone,
I'm still here.
I just wanted to give you, listeners that stayed right till the end, a little bonus, little fun fact about Motown. And this is really amazing. Berry Gordy's son, the founder of Motown, his son's called Stefan, and his grandson is called Skylar. And the two of them make up the pop duo LMFAO, famous for the party rock anthem, Mind Blown. Every day I'm shuffling.